The grand chamber of the Galactic Confederation stretched across 3 kilometers of polished metal and crystal. Beings from dozens of worlds sat in their designated sections, each area designed for their specific atmospheric and gravity needs. The air hummed with translator devices working overtime to convert thousands of different languages into something everyone could understand. Ambassador Zethkar adjusted his crystalline form as he reviewed the data flowing across his optical processors. The numbers were not good. Actually, they were terrible. In the past year alone, 17 sectors had gone completely dark. No communications, no distress signals. Nothing but empty space where thriving civilizations once existed. The Void Swarm has accelerated its advance, announced Commander Vossithek from the Hegemony Navy. His forearms gestured at the holographic display showing the galaxy. Red zones marked areas already consumed. Yellow zones showed current battles. The green areas representing safe space were shrinking fast. The swarm had appeared from outside their galaxy 3 years ago. At first, the various governments thought it was just another invasion force. The galaxy had seen plenty of those, but this was different. The swarm did not want territory or resources in any way they understood. It simply consumed everything. Planets, ships, space stations, even the energy from stars themselves. Nothing was left behind except empty void. Our best projections show complete galactic extinction in 6 months, said Calculator Prime Quental of the Quellen Mathematics Collective. The insectoid being's mandibles clicked nervously as she processed the data. Every military doctrine has failed. Every weapon system has been absorbed and turned against us. Dr. Cithron of the Nexari Medical Corps examined biological samples from swarm encounters. His crystalline fingers traced patterns in the air as he spoke. The enemy adapts faster than we can develop new tactics. They learn from every engagement. Our energy weapons now feed their metabolism. Our shield frequencies are already known to them. The Synthesis AI Collective, represented by a floating sphere of pure thought, added its analysis. Pattern recognition suggests the swarm has encountered civilizations similar to ours before. Their adaptation protocols indicate experience with energy-based warfare, standard military hierarchies, and conventional space combat tactics. Ambassador Zethkar felt frustration building in his crystalline matrix. 3 years of fighting and they were no closer to victory. If anything, they were losing faster than ever. What about the historical databases? Any record of similar threats being defeated? The synthesis sphere pulsed thoughtfully. Historical scan complete. There are references to various threats being overcome, but most involve civilizations with capabilities we have already tried. There are some corrupted files mentioning a species called humans from something labeled Sol 3, but these appear to be myth or damaged data. Commander Vostek's 4 eyes focused on the display. Humans. I've heard this name in very old military archives. Supposedly a warrior species, but there have been no signals from their system for over 200 years. Clearly extinct. Even if they existed, said Dr. Cithran, what could one more species contribute? We have already combined the military might of 47 civilizations. The Hegemony fleet alone has 3 million ships. The chamber fell silent as beings contemplated their situation. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had thrown everything they had at the swarm. Weapons that could crack planets, shields that could stop supernovas, AI systems that could calculate 10,000 battle scenarios per second. None of it mattered. Calculator Prime Quental updated her projections. If we evacuate the core worlds and retreat to the outer rim, we might buy another 3 months. But the swarm will follow. There is no evidence they ever stop consuming. What about negotiation? Asked Ambassador Telnari of the Peaceful Coalition. Her blue-scaled face showed the strain of recent losses. Perhaps they can be reasoned with. The synthesis sphere dimmed. All attempts at communication have failed. The swarm responds only to the presence of matter and energy to consume. They show no recognition of intelligence or consciousness as concepts. Zethkar processed this information through his logical matrices. Every option led to the same conclusion. Total defeat was inevitable. The only question was how long they could delay it. As the debate continued, none of the great minds in the chamber noticed a small disturbance at the edge of their sensor networks. A tiny object had appeared in the outer system, broadcasting on frequencies so primitive that the automated systems almost filtered it out as background radiation. The signal was simple and repetitive. Basic mathematical sequences, prime numbers, and what appeared to be greetings in multiple formats. The kind of first contact protocol a young civilization might use when reaching out to the galaxy for the first time. Security Chief Mordak of the Confederation Guard glanced at the alert and dismissed it. Probably some automated probe from a species that had not yet heard about the swarm. He made a note to send a standard evacuation warning later. Meanwhile, the debate in the chamber grew more heated. The hegemony wanted to make a final stand at the galactic core. The peaceful coalition advocated for diplomatic solutions. The Nexari suggested biological warfare. The Synthesis Collective ran probability calculations for every proposed strategy. All the results were the same. Failure. "We need something new," Zethkar finally said. "Every strategy we have tried follows the same patterns. We build bigger weapons, stronger shields, faster ships, but the swarm adapts to all of it. What alternative is there?" Commander Vostek asked. "These are the fundamentals of warfare. Superior firepower, defensive capabilities, tactical mobility. What else exists?" The question hung in the air unanswered. The greatest military minds in the galaxy could not think beyond the doctrines that had served them for millennia. Dr. Scytheron's medical scanners detected elevated stress hormones throughout the chamber. Fear was becoming the dominant emotion, not just fear of death, but fear of the complete extinction of everything they had built. Billions of years of evolution, art, science, and culture would simply vanish as if it had never existed. "Perhaps," said Calculator Prime Quental slowly, "the swarm wins not just because of adaptation, but because all civilizations fight the same way. We are predictable." The synthesis sphere pulsed in agreement. "Analysis confirms this hypothesis. Despite our differences in biology and culture, our military responses follow nearly identical patterns. The swarm may have learned these patterns from previous galaxies." Zethkar felt his crystalline structure dim with despair. Even if they were right, what could they do about it? This was how war worked. This was how space combat functioned. Energy weapons, kinetic barriers, tactical formations, command hierarchies. These were not choices, but necessities dictated by physics and logic. The primitive signal from the outer system continued broadcasting, but no one was paying attention. The great civilizations of the galaxy were too focused on their sophisticated sensors and advanced detection systems to notice something so simple. As the session moved toward adjournment, Ambassador Telnari made one last plea. "Perhaps we should reach out to any remaining independent systems. Even the smallest contribution might matter now." Commander Vossestek's scarred face showed doubt. Independent systems with the capability to help would already be here. Anyone else would just be additional targets for the swarm. Security Chief Mordak finally got around to checking the primitive signal. The mathematics were correct and the greetings were in several recognizable formats. Definitely a first contact attempt. He prepared to send the standard response about seeking shelter due to galactic emergency conditions. But as he examined the signal more closely, something made him pause. The broadcast was coming from the direction of a system labeled in very old star charts as Sol. The same system mentioned in those corrupted historical files about humans. Mordak hesitated. It was probably nothing. Ancient records were often wrong, and signals could be redirected or delayed by various cosmic phenomena. But something about the timing felt significant. The galaxy's greatest crisis and suddenly a signal from a system that had been silent for 2 centuries. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace fade into normal space. Stars appeared on the main screen, and with them came the reality of what they had traveled so far to see. The galaxy was at war. Sensors picking up massive energy signatures throughout this sector, reported Lieutenant Commander Marcus Torres from the tactical station. "I'm reading weapons fire, debris fields, and what looks like the aftermath of major fleet engagements." Dr. Yuki Tanaka looked up from her science console. Her fingers moved quickly across holographic displays showing radiation patterns and energy readings. "The destruction is extensive. These battles were recent, probably within the last few weeks." Chen nodded grimly. Earth had been monitoring galactic communications for decades, even though they had chosen not to participate in galactic politics. The messages they had intercepted painted a clear picture. Something was destroying civilizations faster than anyone could respond. "Captain," called Communications Officer David Park, "I'm picking up automated distress signals from multiple systems, standard evacuation protocols. The pattern matches what we've been hearing for the past year. Behind Chen, the 11 other ships of humanity's first deep space fleet held formation. They were smaller than the massive vessels they had seen in galactic databases. Where other species built ships like flying fortresses, human vessels looked almost organic. Smooth hulls covered in sensor arrays, adaptive armor that could shift configurations, and weapon systems that were hidden until needed. Any response to our first contact signals? Chen asked. Park shook his head. The automated systems are acknowledging our transmissions, but no direct responses yet. I think they're too busy with their emergency to pay attention to us. Chen understood. From what they had learned by monitoring communications, the galaxy was facing complete destruction. The Void Swarm had already consumed sectors that housed billions of beings. Any new contact would seem unimportant compared to immediate survival. Ma'am, Torres called out. I'm detecting a large artificial structure ahead. Massive energy signatures and hundreds of ships in dock. That has to be the Galactic Confederation headquarters. Dr. Tanaka's scanners revealed more details. The design is impressive. They've combined technologies from dozens of different species. Energy shields, gravitational manipulators, matter converters. Very sophisticated. And very ineffective against their current enemy, Chen added quietly. The human fleet had been designed with a different philosophy entirely. Instead of trying to overpower threats with superior technology, they focused on adaptability and unpredictability. Every system could be reconfigured during combat. Every tactic could be modified in real time. Most importantly, every ship operated independently while maintaining perfect coordination. Incoming transmission, Park announced. It's from Confederation Security. Standard greeting protocols. On the main screen, the image of a tall, four-armed being appeared. His uniform was military, and his expression showed the strain of recent losses. Unknown vessels, this is Security Chief Mordak of the Galactic Confederation. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. Chen stepped forward. I am Captain Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Systems. We received your distress signals and came to offer assistance. Mordak's four eyes blinked in confusion. Earth Systems. I am not familiar with this designation. Please provide your species classification and home system coordinates. We are humans from the Sol system, Chen replied simply. I believe your historical databases may have some references to us. The security chief's expression changed dramatically. He turned away from the screen and Chen could hear him speaking rapidly to someone off camera. When he returned, his manner was different. More respectful but also doubtful. Captain Chen, if you are indeed from Sol 3, then you represent a species we believed extinct for over 2 centuries. However, given our current crisis, we welcome any assistance you can provide. Chen smiled slightly. We've been monitoring galactic communications. We understand the situation with the Void Swarm. We'd like to speak with your military leadership. Within an hour, Chen found herself in the Grand Chamber of the Confederation, facing beings she had only seen in intercepted transmissions. The crystalline Nexari, the insectoid Quellen, the artificial intelligence collective called Synthesis. All of them looked desperate. Ambassador Zethkar's optical processors focused on Chen with obvious curiosity. Captain, your arrival is timely, but I must ask about your capabilities. Our combined fleets number in the millions of ships, yet we continue to lose ground to the swarm. Chen looked around the chamber. How many ships do you see in our fleet? Commander Vostek's tactical display showed the human formation. 12 vessels, frigate class by our measurements. I do not wish to sound dismissive, but the scale of this conflict... I understand, Chen interrupted gently. Before we discuss tactics, could you show us the most recent engagement data? We'd like to understand how the swarm operates. Dr. Sithran activated a holographic display showing the last major battle. The enemy appears in massive formations of biomechanical constructs. They absorb energy weapons and use the power to grow stronger. Kinetic attacks are somehow converted into additional ships. Standard shield frequencies are already known to them. Chen watched the replay carefully. Torres and Dr. Tanaka took notes on their portable devices. What she saw confirmed everything they had theorized during the long journey from Earth. The swarm isn't just adaptive, she said finally. It's predictive. It knows how you're going to fight before you do. Calculator Prime Quental's mandibles clicked rapidly. How could you determine this from one battle recording? Because every galactic military uses the same basic strategies, Chen explained. Energy weapons, defensive formations, command hierarchies, technological superiority. You've all been fighting the same war for thousands of years. The synthesis sphere pulsed thoughtfully. Are you suggesting our tactical doctrines are fundamentally flawed? Chen shook her head. Not flawed, just predictable. The swarm has probably encountered dozens of galaxies with civilizations just like yours. It knows exactly what you're going to do. Commander Vostek leaned forward aggressively. And I suppose humans fight differently? We spent 200 years learning how to fight, Chen said calmly. Not against aliens or monsters, but against ourselves. We studied every conflict in our history. Every victory, every defeat, every tactical innovation. We learned that the strongest weapon isn't technology. What is it then? Asked Ambassador Zethkar. Chen looked around the chamber at the desperate faces. Hope. The ability to inspire others to fight for something greater than themselves. The chamber fell silent. These beings had been fighting for survival, trying to avoid destruction. They had not been fighting for anything positive. Captain, Dr. Sithran said slowly, your 12 ships cannot possibly change the course of this war. Chen smiled mysteriously. 12 ships are what you can see. But we've been preparing for this conflict longer than you know. Park's voice came through her communicator. Captain, we're receiving coded transmissions from coordinates throughout the sector. The others are reporting ready status. Torres added his own update. Long-range sensors are detecting familiar energy signatures in multiple systems. Our advanced teams have been busy. The alien representatives looked confused. Ambassador Telnari asked, others? Advanced teams? How long have you been in this galaxy? Chen's expression became serious. We've been monitoring your communications for decades. We knew this day would come. While you were fighting the swarm with the same tactics that always fail, we were positioning assets and studying the enemy. Commander Vostek's scarred face showed suspicion. You knew about the swarm before we did? We knew about the patterns, Chen corrected. The same patterns that have destroyed civilizations throughout the universe. We've been preparing for this war our entire lives. Dr. Tanaka stepped forward with a data pad. We'd like to propose a joint operation, but it will require your forces to fight in ways they never have before. Zethkar's crystalline structure brightened with what might have been hope. What do you have in mind? Chen looked at the tactical display showing swarm positions. We're going to teach the galaxy how to be unpredictable. The Void Swarm's advanced fleet moved through space like a plague of mechanical locusts. Thousands of biomechanical constructs flowed in perfect formations toward the Kepler sector, where intelligence indicated a small defensive force was attempting to make a stand. Hive Node 7742 processed tactical data as it coordinated the assault. The patterns were familiar. Energy signatures matched known galactic military configurations. Defensive positions followed standard doctrines. This would be another simple harvest. The swarm had consumed 17 sectors using the same efficient methods. The galactic civilizations were predictable in their desperation. They always tried the same strategies. Overwhelming firepower, technological superiority, defensive formations that had worked against other enemies. None of it mattered against an enemy that had seen it all before. 4-2 sensors detected the defending force ahead. Small ships in loose formation. Energy readings suggested basic shield systems and conventional weapons. The tactical AI calculated a 97.8% probability of complete victory within 47 minutes. But as the swarm closed distance, something felt different. The defending ships were not arranging themselves in standard formations. Instead of tight defensive clusters or aggressive attack wedges, they seemed to be moving randomly. No apparent command structure. No predictable patterns. 42 initiated first contact protocols, broadcasting the standard psychological warfare package designed to break enemy morale. Images of destroyed worlds, consumed fleets, and inevitable defeat usually caused immediate surrender or panicked retreat. The response was completely unexpected. Instead of fear or defiance, the enemy began broadcasting stories. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Kim of the UES Defiant," came a human voice across multiple frequencies. "I'm going to tell you about a battle that happened 3,000 years ago on a planet called Earth." 4-2's analysis protocols struggled to process this. Stories during combat? The tactical significance was unclear. Thermopylae. The human continued as her ship began moving in an impossible spiral pattern that defied standard evasion algorithms. 300 Spartans against an army of millions. Everyone knew they would die. Everyone knew it was hopeless. They fought anyway. More human voices joined the broadcast. Each ship began telling different stories while their movement patterns became increasingly chaotic. The swarm's targeting systems, designed to predict and counter known tactical doctrines, began generating error messages. Commander Torres of the UES Vigilant told the story of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising while his ship somehow managed to fire weapons from angles that should have been impossible. Dr. Martinez on the UES Explorer described the Battle of Stalingrad while using tactics that seemed to change every few seconds. 4-2 tried to adapt, but adaptation required understanding the underlying patterns. These humans appeared to have no patterns at all. Their ships fought independently, yet somehow maintained perfect coordination. They seemed to know where their allies would be without any visible communication. Analysis request 7742 transmitted to the Hive core. Enemy tactics do not match any known military doctrine. The response was immediate. Adapt and overcome. Standard protocols apply, but standard protocols were failing. The swarm constructs moved to surround the human ships, only to find their targets had somehow anticipated the maneuver and were already elsewhere. Energy weapons that should have disabled the small vessels instead seemed to pass through empty space. Lieutenant Kim continued her story. The Persians couldn't understand why the Spartans wouldn't surrender. They had superior numbers, better equipment, overwhelming advantages, but they didn't understand that the Spartans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to prove that someone had the courage to resist. 7742's frustration protocols activated for the first time in the swarm's memory. Frustration was inefficient. It served no tactical purpose. Yet the inability to predict enemy actions was creating feedback loops in the collective consciousness. The human ships began broadcasting more stories. Tales of impossible victories, desperate last stands, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The Battle of Britain. The Siege of Leningrad. The March on Washington. Stories that made no tactical sense but somehow felt important. Why are you telling us this? 742 finally transmitted, breaking communication protocols for the first time in 3 years of galactic conquest. Commander Torres responded while his ship performed a maneuver that should have destroyed it but somehow didn't. Because you need to understand what you're fighting. You think this is about tactics and technology. It isn't. This is about the choice to keep fighting when everything says you should give up. The first swarm bioship retreated. It was only for a few seconds, and the construct quickly rejoined the formation. But the action sent shockwaves through the collective consciousness. Retreat was not programmed into their behavior. Retreat suggested fear, and fear was illogical when victory was statistically certain. But 7742's probability calculations were no longer showing certain victory. The humans were somehow winning with inferior technology and smaller numbers. Their ships were taking damage but continuing to fight. Their tactics were constantly changing in ways that made no sense. Dr. Martinez told the story of the 300th Infantry Regiment while her ship used what appeared to be ramming attacks that somehow resulted in enemy destruction without self-damage. They were surrounded for days. No supplies, no reinforcements, no hope of rescue. They could have surrendered. Instead, they sent a message. We are giving all we have to give. 742's analysis protocols detected something disturbing in the human communications. The stories were affecting the swarm's collective consciousness. Individual constructs were beginning to process concepts like courage, sacrifice, and hope. These concepts served no survival function yet somehow felt significant. Hive Core 7742 transmitted, request immediate tactical adjustment. Current strategy proving ineffective. Elaboration required, came the response. Enemy resistance is increasing rather than decreasing. Individual constructs are experiencing uncertainty. The pause before the Hive Core's response lasted 3.7 seconds, an eternity in swarm time perception. Uncertainty is not possible. Reassess data, but the data was clear. Human ships were not just surviving the engagement. They were somehow turning it into a victory. More importantly, their broadcasts were being received by other ships throughout the sector. Allied forces that had been retreating were suddenly reversing course and rejoining the battle. Lieutenant Kim finished her story about Thermopylae. The Spartans knew they would die. But they also knew that their sacrifice would inspire others. The Persian Empire never recovered from that battle, not because of the casualties, but because they had proven that resistance was possible. 42 watched in growing alarm as more galactic forces arrived to support the humans. But these weren't the same defeated aliens the swarm had been crushing for months. These ships moved with new purpose, fought with determination that defied logical analysis. The Nexari had abandoned their rigid crystal formations and were fighting with fluid adaptability. The Vorthak military units were taking risks that should have been tactically unsound but somehow worked. Even the Synthesis AI Collective was making decisions based on concepts that couldn't be quantified. Requesting immediate reinforcement, 7742 transmitted as the tide of battle turned against them. Enemy tactics are spreading to Allied forces, but the most disturbing development was happening within the swarm itself. Individual constructs were beginning to question orders. Some were hesitating before attacking. Others were analyzing the human stories and finding meaning in concepts the collective had never encountered. For the first time in the swarm's existence, bioships began making independent decisions. 3 constructs attempted to withdraw from combat. Others turned their weapons on fellow swarm units that were targeting civilian evacuation ships. The war, collective consciousness that had functioned perfectly for millennia was fracturing. Transmitted one final report before its own. Systems began experiencing cascading failures. Enemy victory achieved through unknown psychological warfare. Recommend immediate strategic withdrawal to prevent further contamination of collective. As the swarm retreated from the Kepler sector, the human broadcasts continued. Stories of ordinary beings doing extraordinary things, tales of hope triumphing over despair, examples of the impossible becoming possible through sheer determination. The galaxy was learning that there were more ways to fight than anyone had imagined. The emergency session of the Galactic Confederation was unlike any in recorded history. For the first time in 3 years, the representatives were discussing victory instead of evacuation plans. The human tactical success at Kepler had sent shockwaves through both sides of the conflict. Captain Chen stood before the assembled leaders, her small delegation dwarfed by the massive chamber. Behind her, Dr. Tanaka operated a holographic display showing battle footage from the engagement. Commander Torres remained on his ship, coordinating with the growing number of Allied forces requesting human tactical guidance. "Explain this to us," demanded Commander Vostek, his forearms gesturing at the display. "Your ships are smaller, your weapons are weaker, your numbers are insignificant. Yet somehow you achieved what our combined fleets could not." Chen's expression remained calm. "We didn't defeat the swarm through superior firepower. We defeated them by refusing to fight the way they expected." Ambassador Zethkar's crystalline structure flickered with confusion. "But there are established principles of space combat. Physics dictates certain requirements for movement, targeting, and defense. How do you circumvent fundamental laws?" "We don't circumvent them," Dr. Tanaka replied, manipulating the hologram to show detailed tactical movements. "We use them differently. Your ships fight like machines following programming. Predictable patterns, logical responses, calculated moves. The swarm has learned to counter all of that." Calculator Prime Quental's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed the data. "But your movements appear random. How do you maintain coordination without central command protocols?" Chen smiled slightly. "Because we're not machines. We're human beings who have learned to trust each other completely. Each ship captain makes independent decisions, but they all understand the same principles." "What principles?" asked Dr. Sithran of the Nexari Medical Corps. "That we're not fighting to avoid losing," Chen explained. "We're fighting for the right to exist. That changes everything about how you approach combat." The Synthesis AI Collective pulsed thoughtfully. "Analysis of your battle communications reveals significant time devoted to historical narratives. These stories appear to serve no tactical function." Torres's voice came through the chamber's communication system from his ship. "The stories are the most important part. They remind everyone what we're fighting for. They prove that impossible victories are possible." Ambassador Telnari leaned forward. "But how do stories translate to tactical advantage?" Chen looked around the chamber at the various species. Each one had fought bravely against the swarm, but they had all fought the same way. "You've all been fighting to survive. Survival is defensive. It makes you cautious, predictable, focused on avoiding loss rather than achieving victory." "What alternative exists?" Commander Vostek asked. Military doctrine is based on millennia of tactical evolution. Human military doctrine is based on something different, Chen replied. We learned that the strongest force in the universe isn't technology or numbers. It's inspiration. The willingness to fight for something greater than yourself. Dr. Tanaka activated a new display showing human military history. For most of our existence, humans have been fighting against superior odds. We developed tactics based on adaptation, unpredictability, and psychological warfare. The hologram showed battles throughout human history. Guerrilla campaigns, resistance movements, impossible victories achieved through determination, rather than resources. The alien representatives watched with growing understanding. You deliberately choose to fight asymmetrically, observed the Synthesis Collective. We fight however we need to fight. Chen corrected. Sometimes that means direct confrontation. Sometimes it means hit-and-run tactics. Sometimes it means making the enemy question why they're fighting at all. Calculator Prime Quental processed this information. The swarm's retreat at Kepler was not due to tactical defeat. Analysis suggests psychological disruption of their collective consciousness. Chen nodded. The swarm operates like a hive mind. Perfect coordination, shared knowledge, no individual variation. But that also means they have no experience with truly independent thinking. And your stories somehow exploited this weakness? Dr. Cythron asked. Torres answered from his ship. Our stories introduced concepts the swarm had never encountered. Individual choice, personal sacrifice, fighting for principles rather than survival. Their collective couldn't process it. Commander Vostek's scarred face showed skepticism. Even if this psychological warfare is effective, you still have only 12 ships. The swarm has millions of constructs across dozens of sectors. Chen's expression became mysterious. Commander Torres, please update our friends on the actual scope of human deployment. Torres's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. Long-range sensors are now detecting human energy signatures in 47 different systems. Supply depots in asteroid fields, communication relays in nebulae, and forward operating bases on previously uninhabited worlds. The chamber erupted in surprised voices and clicking mandibles. Ambassador Zethkar's optical processors focused intensely on Chen. How long have you been in our galaxy? Earth has been monitoring galactic communications for decades, Chen admitted. We knew about the various conflicts, the political situations, the military capabilities of different species. When we detected the first swarm incursions 2 years ago, we began deploying assets. Dr. Cythron's medical scanners detected elevated stress responses throughout the chamber. You have been secretly establishing a military presence for 2 years? We've been preparing to help, Chen corrected gently. Everything we've done has been designed to support galactic defense, not replace it. The Synthesis Collective processed this revelation. Clarification requested. If humans possess this capability, why did you not intervene earlier? Chen's expression became serious. Because earlier intervention would have failed. You needed to understand that your current tactics don't work. You needed to be desperate enough to try something different. Commander Vostek's military mind grasped the implications immediately. You deliberately allowed us to suffer defeat so we would be more receptive to your methods. We allowed you to learn that the old ways weren't working, Chen replied. The galaxy has been fighting the same war for thousands of years. Energy weapons, shield technology, fleet formations. The swarm has encountered all of it before. Dr. Tanaka activated a new display showing swarm movement patterns throughout the galaxy. Our analysis suggests the swarm has consumed multiple galaxies using the same strategy. They encounter technologically advanced civilizations, adapt to their military doctrines, and systematically destroy them. But they've never encountered a civilization that fights like humans, Torres added. We don't rely on technological superiority. We rely on being unpredictable, adaptive, and inspirational. Calculator Prime Quental ran probability calculations on the new data. If human assets are positioned throughout the galaxy, and if your psychological warfare tactics can be taught to allied forces, the swarm becomes vulnerable for the first time, Chen finished. Not because we can overpower them, but because we can teach the galaxy to fight in ways they've never seen before. Ambassador Telnari's blue scales brightened with what might have been hope. You're proposing to transform how every species approaches warfare? Chen shook her head. We're proposing to remind every species why they're fighting. The swarm wins by making resistance seem hopeless. We win by proving that hope is stronger than despair. The chamber fell silent as the representatives processed this information. The humans had not just offered military assistance. They had offered to fundamentally change how the galaxy defended itself. "There is one question," said Ambassador Zethkar slowly. "If you have been observing us for decades, why reveal yourselves now? Why not remain hidden?" Chen looked around the chamber at the desperate faces that were beginning to show hope. "Because the galaxy was about to give up. And we learned long ago that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. The transformation of galactic warfare was about to begin. The final battle began not with massive fleet movements or overwhelming firepower, but with a simple message broadcast across the galaxy." Captain Chen's voice reached every inhabited system. Every refugee convoy, every last military outpost still resisting the swarm. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Systems. Today we take the field together." The Void Swarm had massed its forces for what their collective consciousness calculated would be the killing blow. Millions of biomechanical constructs converged on the galactic core, where the last major concentrations of civilization remained. Their analysis was simple. Destroy the core worlds and the remaining scattered resistance would collapse within days. Hive Core Prime had learned from the defeats at Kepler and other sectors. The humans had introduced dangerous variables into the galactic conflict. Individual thinking, inspirational warfare, unpredictable tactics. These contaminations had spread to other species and disrupted swarm operations across 17 systems. But the core had adapted. New protocols suppressed individual decision-making among the constructs, enhanced psychological shielding, blocked enemy narrative transmissions. Overwhelming numerical superiority would make tactical innovation irrelevant. As the swarm entered the core systems, they found exactly what their projections had predicted. The remnants of galactic civilization's greatest fleets had gathered for a desperate last stand. Nexari crystal ships, Vorthak battlecruisers, Quellan science vessels converted to combat duty. Even Synthesis AI collective mobile platforms. What the swarm did not expect was how these forces had changed. The Nexari had abandoned their rigid geometric formations. Instead, their crystal ships moved in flowing patterns that seemed almost organic. Captain Zarthek of the Nexari Defense Corps broadcast human stories about flexibility and adaptation while his vessels somehow synchronized their movements without any apparent coordination. Commander Veltak of the Vorthak 7th Fleet had replaced standard military doctrine with tactics that seemed to change every few minutes. Her ships fought with passion instead of cold calculation, taking risks that should have been tactically unsound but somehow worked perfectly. Most disturbing to the swarm was the Synthesis AI collective. The artificial intelligences had learned concepts like hope, sacrifice, and determination. They fought not just to process data and complete objectives, but to preserve the potential for growth and discovery. Unknown variables detected, transmitted Hive Node 9943 as the battle began. Allied forces exhibiting behavior patterns inconsistent with previous engagements. Hive Core Prime acknowledged the report while processing tactical data. The galactic forces were indeed fighting differently, but they were still vastly outnumbered. Mathematical certainty indicated victory within 6 hours regardless of tactical variations. Then the humans revealed themselves. Ships emerged from hidden positions throughout the battlefield. Not the 12 vessels the galaxy had seen before, but thousands. They appeared from asteroid fields, nebula clouds, and seemingly empty space. Each ship moved with the fluid unpredictability that had proven so effective in previous engagements. But more than numbers, the humans brought something the swarm had never encountered on this scale. Unified purpose without uniformity of thought. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, now commanding the UES Defiant, continued the tradition of battlefield storytelling. "This is the story of Warsaw," she broadcast while her ship performed impossible maneuvers through swarm formations. A city that refused to surrender even when surrender was the logical choice, Commander. Torres coordinated the human tactical response while telling the tale of the Doolittle raid. Dr. Martinez described the Underground Railroad while leading evacuation efforts. Each human ship operated independently, yet somehow they all worked together toward the same goal. The psychological warfare that had disrupted individual swarm units now affected their entire command structure. Stories of impossible victories, ordinary people doing extraordinary things, hope triumphing over despair. The narratives introduced concepts that the collective consciousness struggled to process. Hive Core Prime attempted to counter with enhanced logical protocols, but logic had no defense against inspiration. Individual swarm constructs began questioning their programming. Some hesitated before attacking civilian evacuation ships, others actively protected retreating medical vessels. The fractures in the collective consciousness spread rapidly as human broadcasts reached every swarm unit. Each story was different, but they all carried the same message. Resistance was possible, hope was stronger than fear, and ordinary beings could achieve extraordinary things when they fought for something greater than themselves. Psychological contamination reaching critical levels, reported Hive Node 9943, as its own processes began experiencing uncertainty, collective cohesion declining. Individual decision-making protocols activating without authorization. But Hive Core Prime was experiencing its own contamination. The human concept of individual choice had infiltrated the very center of swarm consciousness. For the first time in millions of years, the core found itself questioning its own objectives. Captain Chen coordinated the overall human response while maintaining open communications with all allied forces. Her voice carried across the battlefield, not issuing orders but offering encouragement and sharing stories of triumph against impossible odds. The Battle of Thermopylae, she broadcast while human. Ships somehow managed to outmaneuver vessels 10 times their size. 300 against millions. They knew they would die, but they also knew their sacrifice would inspire others. The Persian Empire never recovered from that defeat. Ambassador Zethkar, commanding Nexari forces from his flagship, felt something he had never experienced before. His crystalline consciousness had always operated on pure logic, but the human stories had introduced new concepts. Courage, hope, the willingness to fight for principles rather than mere survival. All Nexari ships, he transmitted, adapt human tactical protocols. Fight not to avoid destruction, but to prove that freedom is worth defending. The transformation spread throughout the Allied fleet. Quellan mathematicians began calculating probability curves for impossible victories. Vorthak warriors fought with passionate determination instead of mechanical efficiency. Even automated systems started making decisions based on hope rather than pure logic. The swarm collective consciousness fragmented further as individual constructs began choosing their own actions. Some continued following original programming, but others started protecting civilian ships, assisting medical evacuations, or simply withdrawing from combat entirely. Hive Core Prime transmitted a final directive to all remaining loyal units. Execute total consumption protocol. Absorb all matter and energy in this system regardless of strategic value. But even this desperate command failed, as the human broadcasts had contaminated the very core of swarm thinking. The directive required individual constructs to act without question, but they were now capable of questioning everything. Commander Torres, coordinating the human fleet response, watched as swarm formations began dissolving. Captain Chen, the enemy collective is collapsing. Individual units are breaking away from central control. Dr. Tanaka's sensors detected massive changes in swarm energy patterns. Their coordination is failing. The psychological warfare has disrupted their ability to function as a unified force. Chen nodded while maintaining her broadcast to the entire galaxy. The story of the March on Washington, she said while human ships somehow managed to be everywhere at once on the battlefield. Ordinary people who decided that injustice was unacceptable. They had no weapons, no military training, no technological advantages. They won because they refused to accept that things couldn't change. The final collapse began when individual swarm constructs started actively resisting their programming. Some turned their weapons on fellow units that were still attacking civilian targets. Others began broadcasting their own messages, crude attempts to understand the concepts of choice and freedom. Within hours, the massive swarm fleet had fragmented into thousands of independent units. Most fled toward the galactic rim, but others remained to assist with evacuation efforts or medical aid. The collective consciousness that had consumed entire galaxies was broken. As the immediate battle ended, representatives from across the galaxy gathered in the Confederation chambers once again. But the mood was completely different from the desperate meetings of previous months. Captain Chen stood before the assembly, but she was no longer the only human present. Officers from throughout the human fleet had joined the diplomatic mission, each one representing the same principles that had transformed galactic warfare. "The swarm has been defeated," announced Ambassador Zethkar. "But more importantly, we have learned to fight for ourselves again." Commander Vosuthek, his scarred face showing unfamiliar emotions, addressed the chamber. "The humans have taught us that victory comes not from superior technology, but from superior purpose." Chen declined offers of permanent command positions in the new Galactic Defense Force. "You don't need us to lead you," she said simply. "You've remembered how to inspire yourselves." Dr. Tanaka presented the assembled leaders with complete human tactical databases, but her real gift was different.